We often confuse the concepts of solitude and loneliness, using them interchangeably, when in fact they represent two entirely different experiences. Loneliness is a feeling of emptiness, of being disconnected or unwanted. It's when you're yearning for connection and not finding it. It feels cold, isolating, and painful. Solitude, on the other hand, is something else entirely. It's not the absence of people, it's the presence of yourself. And there is something profoundly powerful about learning to be in your own company, without feeling the urge to escape. When we're constantly surrounded by others, friends, colleagues, family, or even worse, constantly plugged into the lives of strangers through our devices, we start to lose touch with the one voice that truly matters, our own. In solitude, that voice becomes clearer, it gets louder, it starts to remind us of who we are, what we care about, what we believe in, and that's a voice we rarely get to hear in the busyness of life. We live in a world that celebrates constant activity. We reward hustle, praise productivity, and admire those who seem to be everywhere, doing everything. But very rarely do we celebrate those who take a step back, who choose to disconnect not because they're antisocial or unmotivated, but because they value the relationship they have with themselves. That kind of discipline, that ability to sit in stillness and actually enjoy your own presence, is rare, and it's one of the most underrated forms of strength. There's something intimate and grounding about spending time alone. It forces you to be honest. There's no performance, no pretending, no playing a role. It's just you. When there's no one to impress, the mask comes off. You begin to notice your thoughts more clearly. You notice what makes you anxious, what excites you, what ideas keep repeating themselves, and in that noticing, you begin to understand yourself better. When you make solitude a practice, when you intentionally carve out space to just be, you're essentially telling yourself, I matter, my inner world matters. And over time, that builds confidence, it builds clarity. You stop needing external validation as much because you've already spent time affirming your own thoughts, your own values. You've started listening to the quiet truth inside you, the one that doesn't yell for attention, but whispers what's real. There's also a creative power in solitude. Some of the most impactful ideas in history were born not in crowded rooms or noisy debates, but in moments of quiet reflection. When the distractions fall away, your mind has the freedom to wander, to connect dots that weren't obvious before. It's in those moments of stillness that innovation, insight, and intuition come alive. You begin to see things not as the world presents them, but as they truly are. And it's not just about insight or creativity. Solitude helps you regulate your emotions. It allows you to process experiences instead of reacting to them. When you're alone with your thoughts, you start to recognize patterns. You begin to notice how you respond to certain situations, why you're triggered by certain words or actions, and how you can respond differently next time. This level of self-awareness is essential, not just for personal growth, but for how we show up in relationships, in teams, and in leadership. Solitude also teaches us presence. In a society driven by distraction, being alone invites you to slow down and really be where you are. You start noticing small things, a change in the light, the rhythm of your breathing, the thoughts that come and go. You start experiencing life more fully, not rushing through it or numbing out. Silence is often underestimated. In a world addicted to notifications, conversations, opinions, constant input, silence can feel awkward, even unsettling. But that discomfort is telling. It shows how far we've drifted from ourselves, because silence, when embraced, doesn't create emptiness. It reveals what's already there. It peels back the layers we've built to survive the noise, and exposes the thoughts, emotions, and truths we've been too busy to face. When we surround ourselves with constant stimulation, it becomes easy to ignore the things that need our attention the most. Pain, confusion, doubt, questions we don't have answers to. Those things live underneath the surface. Noise helps us avoid them. We scroll, talk, consume, react, all to stay one step ahead of the discomfort. But when we allow silence in, when we stop filling every second with sound or input, those hidden things start to rise. And as uncomfortable as that can be, it's also where real change begins. Silence has the power to clarify. It's like cleaning a dirty window. At first, you just see the grime, you're aware of how cloudy everything is, but then, slowly, the smudges fade and you begin to see things more clearly, thoughts become sharper, emotions become more defined, and suddenly, what felt confusing or overwhelming in the noise becomes manageable, even obvious. The decision you couldn't make before, now it's clear. The idea that felt half-formed, now it has structure. Silence doesn't give you new information. It just lets you hear what's been buried under the surface all along. There's also a kind of truth that only emerges in silence. It's the voice that doesn't compete with others. It doesn't shout. It waits. It waits until you're still enough to notice. And when you do, it often speaks with surprising clarity. You might realize you're chasing something that no longer matters to you, or that you're holding on to a version of yourself that no longer fits. You might finally acknowledge a relationship that's been draining you, or a dream you've been neglecting. These truths aren't new. They've just been drowned out. Noise gives us a way to stay busy. Silence forces us to listen, and not just to what we want to hear, but to what we need to hear. It reveals the gap between the life we're living and the life we're meant to live. And in that gap is where growth begins. Not the kind of growth that happens on the outside, achievements, milestones, applause, but the kind that reshapes you from within. Some people avoid silence because they think it means doing nothing. But silence isn't passive, it's active awareness. It's the work of reflection, of observation, of presence. In silence, you're not disengaged. You're tuning in. You're reconnecting with what's real and filtering out what's irrelevant. You begin to notice how much of your behavior is driven by fear, ego, comparison, or habit. And once you see it, you can begin to shift it. Think about the last time you truly sat in silence, not just quiet surroundings, but actual inner stillness. How long did it take before you reached for your phone or thought of something to do? That impulse to escape is part of the conditioning we've built. But if you resist it, if you stay with the silence just a little longer, something incredible happens. You start to feel centered, grounded. There's a calm that settles in, a clarity that replaces the chaos. Silence also reconnects us to our intuition, that inner compass we all have, the gut feeling, the instinct, the quiet knowing. It gets muffled by external noise. But in silence it begins to speak, and the more you listen, the louder it gets. It starts to guide you, not with pressure or panic, but with calm conviction. It helps you move not just fast, but in the right direction. Leadership isn't about titles or authority. It's not about how loud your voice is or how many people follow your orders. Real leadership begins with knowing yourself. It's rooted in self-awareness. Without it, every decision becomes reactive, every relationship becomes transactional, and every challenge feels personal. But when you know yourself, your values, your triggers, your fears, your strengths, you lead with intention instead of impulse. Self-awareness isn't something you stumble into. It's developed through honest reflection and solitude. It's the ability to recognize your own patterns, question your motives, and understand how your behavior impacts others. Many people move through life without ever stopping to ask themselves why they do what they do, why they pursue certain goals, why they repeat certain mistakes, why they keep ending up in the same emotional cycles. But leaders take the time to ask, and more importantly, they take the time to listen. When you understand yourself, you become better at understanding others. You stop projecting your insecurities onto them. You stop confusing control with influence. You stop leading from ego and start leading from purpose. People can feel that difference. They can sense when a leader is grounded, when decisions come from a place of alignment rather than anxiety. That kind of leadership builds trust. It creates environments where people feel safe, seen, and supported, not managed but inspired. It's easy to think leadership is all about charisma or strategy, but those are just tools. The foundation is self-awareness. Without it, charisma can become manipulation, and strategy can lose its soul. But with it, you're able to stay true to your vision even when things get messy. You're able to take feedback without getting defensive. You can admit when you're wrong without seeing it as weakness. That humility, that emotional intelligence, it doesn't come from training programs. It comes from doing the work within. Being alone is often where that work begins. In solitude, you don't have to perform. You don't have to be on. You don't have to protect your image. You can be honest about what's really going on. What scares you, what excites you, what needs to change. It's in those quiet moments that you start to recognize your blind spots, the beliefs you've inherited without question, the stories you've been telling yourself that may no longer be true. You also begin to understand your true motivations. Not the surface-level ones like success or recognition, but the deeper ones, like the need to feel worthy, to be loved, to feel in control. When you're aware of these things, you can lead from a more honest place. You're not chasing approval, you're not avoiding failure. You're building something that actually matters to you and others, and with that awareness comes clarity. You're not swayed as easily by trends or the pressure to keep up, or the fear of being misunderstood. You become anchored in something deeper. You don't just react to life. You respond. You don't just direct people. You connect with them. You don't just chase goals. You pursue purpose. Leaders who know themselves bring a different energy into the room. They're not threatened by strong opinions. They don't need constant praise. They're able to hold space for others without losing their own grounding. That presence isn't something you fake. It's something you earn by spending time with yourself, by getting familiar with your own inner world, and by being honest enough to face what you find there. Without self-awareness, leadership is just performance. But with it, leadership becomes a form of service, guided not by ego, but by clarity, authenticity, and courage. Life moves fast. There's always something to do, someone to meet, a goal to chase. In the middle of all that motion, it's easy to drift without even realizing it. You start out with clarity, with purpose, with a sense of what matters. But over time, little by little, you get pulled by the noise, expectations, deadlines, distractions. And then one day you wake up and realize you've been moving, maybe even succeeding, but not in a direction that feels meaningful anymore. This is why being alone is not just helpful, it's necessary. It's how we pause long enough to remember what we're doing and why we're doing it. Solitude acts like a mirror. When the noise of the outside world quiets down, you begin to see yourself more clearly. You notice the areas where you've compromised your values. You notice the ways you've stretched yourself thin trying to please people who don't even know you. You notice the small but significant ways you've strayed from your own path. And in that noticing, you're given a choice. You can keep going or you can realign. When you're constantly surrounded by people or input, it's easy to lose that internal compass. You absorb other people's goals, their fears, their urgency. You start chasing things not because they matter to you, but because they matter to someone else. You might find yourself in a job that pays well but drains your soul. You might be working toward a goal that looks impressive on paper but leaves you feeling hollow. These are the slow detours we don't notice until we stop. Solitude is where we stop. It's where we check the map. Not the one society hands us, but the one that exists within us. And sometimes what we find in that silence isn't just a shift in direction. It's a return to something we once believed in but forgot. A return to something simple and real that got buried under years of proving, performing, and pushing. That return is powerful. It doesn't require noise. It requires listening. Being alone gives you the mental and emotional space to ask better questions. Not just what's next, but is this what I want? And not how do I win, but what does success actually mean to me? These are the kinds of questions that rarely get asked in busy rooms or on rushed timelines. They need silence, they need time, they need honesty, and once you start answering them, you begin to make decisions from a place of clarity instead of confusion. When you realign with your purpose, things start to shift. You stop reacting to every opportunity, you start choosing what fits, you stop saying yes out of guilt or fear. You start saying yes because it aligns with your values, your vision, your truth. That kind of alignment doesn't just feel good, it's magnetic. People can feel when you're acting from a place of clarity. It inspires trust, it creates focus, it eliminates the unnecessary. But the world won't pause to give you that alignment. You have to create the space for it yourself. You have to be willing to disconnect from the noise, to pull away from the momentum of more and faster, and sit in the stillness long enough to hear what actually matters to you. That space isn't a luxury. It's not something you get to after the work is done. It is the work. When you give yourself time to realign, you don't just show up differently. You live differently. You start to measure success on your own terms. You begin to choose depth over speed, intention over pressure. You lead your life instead of letting it lead you, and that shift, as subtle as it may seem, changes everything. Disconnection is often viewed as something negative, a sign of laziness, withdrawal, or being out of touch. But in reality, intentional disconnection is one of the most powerful habits we can develop. It's not about escaping life. It's about creating the space to see it more clearly. In a world that never stops talking, moving, or demanding our attention, stepping back is not weakness, it's wisdom. We are constantly connected. Phones, emails, texts, social media feeds, notifications, meetings. There's rarely a moment where something or someone isn't trying to grab a piece of our focus. That constant input wears us down, even if we don't notice it right away. It splits our attention, scatters our energy, and fills our minds with things that may have nothing to do with who we are or what we care about. And the irony is, in trying to stay connected to everything, we often lose connection with ourselves. Clarity doesn't shout over the noise. It arrives in quiet. It needs room to breathe. When you disconnect from the endless streams of information and distraction, you give your mind the opportunity to settle. It's like letting muddy water sit still so the dirt can sink to the bottom and the surface becomes clear. In that stillness, you start to realize which thoughts are yours and which ones have been planted by the pressure of others. You notice the difference between urgency and importance. You begin to feel the pull of what actually matters. Disconnection allows you to reset. It gives your brain the space to stop reacting and start processing. So much of our mental fatigue doesn't come from working too hard. It comes from never stopping. We live in a constant state of partial attention, bouncing from task to task, screen to screen, without ever fully arriving anywhere. But when you step back even briefly, your nervous system has a chance to slow down, your breathing deepens, your focus sharpens, your body and mind sync up again. There's also a deeper layer to disconnection. When you unplug from the outside world, even temporarily, you begin to tap into your inner world. That space within you that often gets ignored or numbed out suddenly has room to speak. You might notice ideas surfacing that you hadn't considered. Emotions you've been suppressing come up to be acknowledged. Memories, reflections, insights, things that were buried under constant stimulation, begin to rise. And many times, those are the very things you've been needing to face. Disconnection isn't about isolation. It's about intentional retreat. It's not pulling away from people. It's pulling away from noise, from speed, from the expectation to be constantly available and responsive. And it's in that retreat that you gain perspective. You start to see patterns you missed before. You realize what habits have been draining you. You understand where your boundaries have been too loose or too rigid. That awareness doesn't come from pushing harder. It comes from stepping back. When you make disconnection a regular practice, it stops being an emergency fix and becomes part of your rhythm. It becomes a place you return to not just when you're burned out, but when you want to stay aligned. Whether it's turning your phone off for an hour a day, taking one weekend a month offline, or carving out quiet mornings before the world wakes up, these small acts of disconnection build resilience. They remind you that presence is a choice, and clarity is a result of protecting your attention. The world will always keep spinning. There will always be more to do, more to read, more to respond to. But that doesn't mean you have to be available to everything all the time. Some of your greatest clarity will come not from doing more, but from doing less. Not from running faster, but from stepping away. Strength is often measured by how much you can carry, how much you can push through, how much pressure you can endure. But there's another kind of strength, quieter, less visible, but just as powerful. It's the strength that comes from being grounded within yourself. The kind that isn't about resistance, but about resilience. And this kind of inner strength is built not in crowds, not in chaos, but in solitude. When you spend time alone, not distracted, not numbing, but truly present with yourself, you begin to notice the parts of you that usually get overlooked, the fears you haven't acknowledged, the dreams you've been putting off, the inner voice that often gets drowned out by the expectations of others. And as you sit with those things, you begin to realize that your greatest strength isn't in how you present yourself to the world, it's in how well you know and accept the person behind that presentation. Solitude gives you a chance to face yourself without judgment, without an audience, without needing to perform. That space, free from comparison and external noise, is where self-trust starts to grow. You begin to learn that you can handle silence, you can handle uncertainty, you can sit with discomfort and not break apart. You stop needing constant feedback to feel valid. You stop needing external validation to feel worthy. And that shift is powerful. There's a kind of confidence that comes from solitude that no accomplishment can replace. It's not the confidence of I can prove myself to them. It's the confidence of I know who I am even when no one's looking. And that's the kind of confidence that lasts. It doesn't shake when things go wrong. It doesn't crumble under criticism. It stays steady because it's rooted in something deeper than praise or approval. Being alone also helps you confront the stories you've been carrying. We all have them, beliefs about who we are, what we can or can't do, what we deserve. Some of these stories were shaped by childhood, by culture, by past failures or pain. And in the rush of daily life, we rarely question them. But solitude invites us to hold those stories up to the light, to ask, is this still true? Did I choose this belief or did I inherit it? That kind of inquiry takes courage. It takes strength to rewrite your inner narrative. But that strength begins with space. Inner strength isn't loud. It doesn't show up in dramatic moments or public wins. It's built in the small, quiet choices, choosing to reflect instead of react, choosing to pause instead of push, choosing to listen instead of escape. These moments may not look powerful from the outside, but over time they create a core that's unshakable. Solitude also helps you set boundaries, not just with others, but with yourself. You begin to notice the ways you sabotage your own peace, the habits that keep you stuck, the distractions you reach for when things feel too real, and instead of judging yourself for them, you start to meet them with curiosity. You begin to take responsibility, not in a punishing way, but in a grounded way. You start making choices that align with who you're becoming, not just who you've been. And as that alignment grows, so does your ability to lead, to connect, to show up. Because people can sense when someone has done the inner work. They can feel when someone isn't driven by ego or insecurity, but by clarity. And that presence, calm, centered, steady, it's not something you can fake. It's something you earn through time spent alone, through the practice of knowing and trusting yourself. This kind of strength doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't chase attention. It doesn't depend on circumstances. It comes from within, and it's built in silence, in stillness, in the honest, often uncomfortable process of being alone with who you are.